Well, here we are in 2023, and we are living in an age where technology has never been more advanced. We have had some incredible breakthroughs, right? In medical technology, technology related to transportation, education technology, even space technology. But then there's one other technology we've seen advancement in, and that's entertainment technology, which includes social media. However, that word entertainment has shifted in our culture to almost mandatory technology with regards to social media. And we're going to look at 3 ways we can see social media very differently today with the intention to become happier people. Let's go. Well, hello there and welcome. If you are new here, my name is Justin. This is the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast, where we use the philosophy of yoga in a practical and everyday way, one small step at a time to become happier people. I cannot wait to get into today's episode with regards to social media. In fact, we're going to be talking about social media on this podcast for the next 2 weeks, so for 4 episodes. And we are going to branch off into not just actual social media itself, but we're going to talk a little bit about technology and our phones in particular, and tablets, something that you have a portable or even a laptop, a portable electronic. We're going to talk about how this affects our everyday life and our happiness. So if you want more content, connect with me at Justin Ricky Yoga on Instagram, JustinRicciYoga. Right there on Instagram. Or sign up for our weekly email in the description of this episode. We only send 1 email a week, and it's free for you. So check that out. We also give you lots of great information about what's coming up on the podcast. So last week we looked at habits and the practice of tapas or heat. And tapas also talks and taps into self-discipline and how we can take a look at how we can form new habits by placing awareness onto the ones we currently have and awareness on the ones that we want based on wanting a long-term effect out of a habit. Now, most of us out there have a habit of checking or scrolling or updating or liking or sharing or creating or commenting or posting. Gosh, even saying all these words gives me exhaustion. And we also are intrigued by social media. So we have these habits of all of that stuff, plus being intrigued. That's a habit too. Because social media is a habit. And when we start to get intentional about what we do with social media, things begin to change. And if you want to live a happier life, you are going to start to think about social media differently than you look at it right now. So as I mentioned, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to look at social media and technology in general, how we use it every day with regards to our happiness. Now, the baseline for these episodes will revolve around a few of our ethical practice of yoga jewels, or the yamas and the niyamas. Now, you see, the practice of yoga has 8 limbs, and 2 of them are yamas and niyamas, which form a foundation for living your life with clarity and intention off the yoga mat. There are other limbs of yoga that are more physical, like the asana practice, that's the actual physical act of doing yoga, or even meditation, which is also greatly physical. You have to still your body up for some meditation, and even still up your mind some too. But in where I base these episodes, they come from the yamas and the niyamas, which are observances and things that we can do in our life that are going to help us make positive changes every day. And we do that on this podcast. That's what we do. We come down to the nitty-gritty everyday things that we do every single day, and we tie that to the practice of yoga off the mat. Now, today's episode in particular focuses on the practice of satya, which is translated to truthfulness. So you might be thinking, well, what does truthfulness have to do with social media? And by the way, satya is a yama. It's one of the yamas. So you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with, social media? Well, in satya, we learn a valuable lesson, and that is that there is a need as a human being to belong to something. specifically with regards to belonging to something a little bit greater, like a community or a group, okay? Yet as humans, we also have a need and a want to grow. And here's the difference. Growing is hard. Belonging is not hard. Why? Because you already belong to things. Think about it. You belong to a neighborhood. You already live in a neighborhood. You belong to the state. You're in your own state, the United States, if you live in the United States. Or if you live in another country or in the United States, you live in a country or maybe a subset of a country in whatever your particular country calls subsets, whether it's a province, or a state, whatever. So you belong to that. You also belong to your workplace, your family, a community with the same interests that you have, like maybe a book club or a bowling league, which bowling league could be thought of as a sport. Well, bowling is a sport, so you could say, okay, then what about baseball or football? So you belong to a sports team. Maybe you even belong to a faith-based organization like a church. Okay, so again, we already belong to something. If you think about your life, you already belong to something. So it's again something that you're doing that you already have done. You're not really doing any extra work to belong. You're already in something. But here's where the ego takes over and where we must practice satya. You see, when your values, your goals, and your actual being, the part of you that your soul, your being, your core, when those begin to change and you just don't feel aligned anymore, that's when the ego starts to take over because you have to make a tough choice. So our egos like to sway us in the direction of, well, I'm comfortable with this group, so I'm just going to kind of hang out there. So you have to ask yourself, do you stay to feel that sense of belonging in that group that you're in? Or do you actually have the courage to stand in your truth and practice satya and grow? That's actually practicing satya. And growth, as we know, is not easy. Belonging is. So the answer to that question, though, whether you decide whether I'm going to stay in this group or I'm going to move on to another group, is one that you have to answer. It's not one that I can answer. It's not one that your partner can answer. It's one that you need to answer. Now, let me give you an example from my own life of this whole belonging to groups and having to make a difficult decision. When I first started practicing yoga several years ago, there were subgroups in a larger yoga community group that I was part of. And when this was going on, and by the way, when this was going on, I had no awareness of the life-changing tools that I now am teaching to you on this podcast, or that I can use for myself, or that are available for any of us out there. So I had no idea. I was literally lost and floating along too, with lots of trauma, lots of things that triggered me, and all I wanted to do was belong. This led me actually to feel really good about yoga because I felt I was in a group that was already doing yoga. And actually some of the people that I was involved in were teaching yoga too. I actually felt like I belonged. But later I came to find out that I was part of a group that was actually not practicing yoga. They were practicing ego. They may have been going into a yoga studio or doing it at home or doing it somewhere else where they were physically, remember I mentioned about the actual practice of physically doing yoga on your mat. That's one of the limbs of yoga. They were actually doing that, like moving their body and doing poses. But they were also cutting everybody else down. They were making things about looks rather than what it feels like. They were shaming others, name calling, running these imaginary races to see who could be better or who could not be, or who's not better. They were making everything all about money at the forefront, like money is the root of all happiness, when we know that's not true. And when I started to notice these things, I started to talk about it with others who I thought heard me, that knew of these groups but weren't really in the groups. But I didn't know that these other people that I was talking to were actually passively putting up with the behavior from those other groups that were kind of toxic, which means that there was so much enabling going around that the enablers were even just as much of the problem as the actual group members are. Because when you enable someone else's behavior, you are just as much part of the problem as that poor behavior because you're tolerating it. Now, I felt like if I broke free, I actually would be treated even worse, very poorly. And I have to tell you, that is actually what happened. I was not valued or seen at all and realized I had never been seen or valued this whole time. So I had to get out. I had to come to realize that I was dealing with narcissistic people who had narcissistic personalities and who had a big troop of enablers. And so I had to move out of that nonsense. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be able to heal. So this has nothing to do with anyone else. This had to do with my ability to grow. If other people want to act like that, have at it. Go on, enjoy it. If that's what makes you happy, that's fine. That's not what was making me happy anymore. I needed to make that difficult choice, and certainly it was not a popular one, and it's not an easy one to make. When you do this, you are met with resentment, you're met with gaslighting, bullying, and so on. And that's okay, because none of that had to do with me, as I just mentioned. What people do, it has nothing to do with me. I had to make the decision, though, that was about me. The decision to move away from that kind of stuff is about me, but the actions are not about me. And so now I look back on that time and I'm actually grateful for the powerful lesson that Satya taught me to stand in my truth and that I don't have to feel like I belong to a community that is toxic in nature, even though it was hard to get out of there. You see, it was in those moments of realizing what was going on that I realized that not everyone is willing to grow. And actually, some people don't even know how to grow and have the capacity to even begin. And that includes people who enable. So it was hard. It was actually one of the hardest things I've gone through because it's like this. It's like you're in a deep relationship with someone and then one day you come home and you find that they like take a zipper. Did you ever see a cartoon like that? There's like a zipper that starts at someone's forehead and they zip off this whole outfit and a whole nother person steps out. That's what that felt like to me. That there were people who were zipping off their actual coverings and showing themselves their true colors. And that's scary. So that's something that you have to understand is when you're belonging to groups like that, when you see that kind of thing happen and you don't realize who you were even dealing with, it is so difficult. But the growth that comes from it is really, really crazy. And it's healthy to grow out of that. So why are we talking about this? Well, because social media is just like this. It's a thing that is used by a group of people, and we feel like we belong when we scroll through Twitter and Instagram and we share posts on Facebook. But I want to make sure I am clear with something here before I give you the 3 ways to look at social media differently. I am not suggesting at all that you should stop using social media. I mean, if you feel like you should, fine, but I'm not saying you have to stop in order to be a happy person. Quite the opposite, actually. I'm also not saying social media is an absolutely horrible, detrimental thing to our society. I'm not saying that either. Quite the contrary. I think social media is a really awesome tool, but the way people use social media, to me, is a horrible thing. The ability to be connected with people is a huge deal for our emotional well-being. Studies and research tell you that. They show that having social connection eases anxiety, provides joy, and even can reduce stress. But make no mistake, social media can also be the opposite, depending on how you use it. So today, we're going to look at 3 ways to look at social media differently, in the hopes that you might be inspired to look at yourself and how you use it, and what changes you might make to make social media more intentional for yourself. And again, when I give you these 3 things, I'm not saying, okay, these are the things that are going to make every single person's social media experience the best. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm giving you some suggestions and some advice, something to think about, something to really, really focus on if you want to get intentional and become a happier person because of your intention. So let's start with number 1. Social media is not a replacement for in-person connection. If there's anything that the past couple of years have taught all of us is that we need each other on a personal level, right? Person to person. Many of us re-examined our entire lives when we were literally forced to stay inside or forced to stay away from each other. You might be a person who came out and said, oh my goodness gracious, I've got to start doing things differently. This is ridiculous. And man, I need more human connection in person. That could have happened too. Social media lets you potentially stay connected with people who live far away, who you can network with, who you can get inspiration from, emotional support. Okay, so maybe we can look at those things as positives. But the truth is that studies will show you there is a connection between heavy social media use and a greater risk of anxiety, depression, loneliness, and even self-loathing, which can turn into self-harm. You experience FOMO on social media, you experience cyberbullying, and you also experience a feeling that you don't look like the people who are on social media or are doing the things that people are doing on, so you're not doing those things that other people are doing on social media. And here's the thing, it's important to remember that there's one big point when it comes to reshaping your thinking specifically about being connected through social media, and that is this. The feeling of a like, a love, a heart, a comment on social media is never going to give you the same feeling as looking in someone's eyes in person who actually sees you and who cares about you. Think about that. How many times do you actually stand there and speak to a person and you see that they see you? You don't get that same feeling on social media. You just don't. Our brains aren't wired that way. Our brains are wired to have human connection. That, my friends, is why it's important to start a growth period now. As you take your mindset away from social media with regards to thinking it's always about connection, because it isn't. The real connection is in person. Number 2, your social media page is, well, yours. I just said that. Your social media page is yours. What does that mean? Well, I didn't say that your social media page is your friend Jimmy's or your Aunt Susie's or your boss Kevin's or your brother-in-law Jonah's. That's not your social media. They have their own social media, okay? Your social media page is yours. Why do we think that social media is about what everyone else sees on our page? Why do we think that? Well, because that's the intention you have behind it right now. I just saw a post very recently where someone shared this type of quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember, but it's something like this. Why do you feel like you always need to watch what I'm doing? Why do you feel like you always need to watch what I'm doing? I want you to actually stop for a second and think about the intent behind a post like that. If someone posts something like, why do you feel like you always need to watch what I'm doing? What do you think the intention is? This was not someone who was looking to inspire other people. This was someone who was intentionally posting this so that the person who they have not yet had a serious conversation with in person, they're hoping that person will see that post. You know what that's called? Passive-aggressive behavior. As I said in the first point, this is not a substitution for real-world situations or real-world conversations. Let's look at how this might work in reverse, too. I actually once dated this guy, and I would post something every so often because I was in my days of not growing, and I was posting things on there just so that other people would see them. And I would hear he would say, "Who peed in your Cheerios?" Like, he knew I was posting to direct my intention to those who pissed me off. But then as I started to get older, I realized that when I stopped being intentional about other people seeing what I post, like my feelings, and I started to move into what I do now, those people are still out there who think that you're directing your social media posts at them. You see, years ago, that's when I decided my social media pages were about me and what I wanted to do to help others change their lives. They were not about me avoiding a conversation I would have in private and hide behind my screen to passively aggressively speak my mind so someone else will see it and know I was upset. If you think things are directed at you on social media, 2 things are happening. Number 1, you are tapping into your insecurities. And number 2, you are ignoring what you really feel about the person who is posting those things. And it might surprise you how much you may actually like or have other feelings for the person that's posting, even though you're denying it to yourself. So you see, your social media page is about you. You should be structuring it so that you see what you want to see and not what you want others to see. This means that there are a lot of things you can do to control your feed, and we're going to discuss that in the next episode. But as someone who practices satya every day by standing in my truth, I have found a much greater sense of happiness by not paying any attention to those types of people who, A, either post all their feelings on there, who are trying to direct their posts to others, like that example I gave you of, why do you feel like you always need to watch what I'm doing? Or those who think that I am posting my feelings about them specifically on there. So let's go on to number 3. Your social media is about creativity. This might be the most important way to shift your mindset. When I started to become a part of groups that fueled my interest in creativity on social media, my entire experience changed. As most of you know who follow me on social media, my posts are nothing more than my creative self trying to inspire someone else. That's what my creativity is all about, and that's what I believe I am called to do. That's my intention behind my social media. For some of you, you may post things on your social media showcasing your beautiful artwork, construction you're doing, baking, cooking, how-to stuff like tips and tricks for certain things. Maybe it's travel or fixing something around your house or decorating your windows, or maybe you're writing poems or you're writing songs. I mean, you know, the list is endless. Wouldn't you think that a social media page full of seeing everyone's creative juices flowing rather than endless rants about political shit that makes you mad, or someone showing you that beach picture, you know, that beach picture you see where someone's sitting in a beach chair and their legs are in front of you and their feet are in the sand, and when you're sitting at work and you can't afford that trip, and now you're getting angry and anxious and envious and jealous, and all of those emotions start to flood because you can't make that happen. Or when September comes and your whole feed is everyone's kids who are going back to school, you've had a rough summer, you've lost your job, your husband or wife or partner or your family is going through a horrible financial struggle, or you've just moved into a brand new neighborhood and you see on social media all of these perfect outfits, perfect smiles. Why can't your kids look like this? Oh my God, right? I mean, this stuff is real. When I was growing up, we took pictures of ourselves. We didn't let the whole world see them. We couldn't. There was no social media. And as fucked up as my childhood really was, I can't imagine how it would be even if we had social media, so that my own life was going to be compared to everyone else's, which it already was growing up. Imagine throwing social media into the mix. Maybe you didn't have what I experienced growing up, and that's good. But there's a different intent with those types of pictures, like the school pictures and the pictures of people on the beach and the pictures of the political stuff or the political rants. There's different intention in there versus being creative. And in an example of that is like showing that how to clothe your kids on a budget. You're helping rather than egoing. So start to think about how you get creative on social media. And let me tell you, it's those who get creative that make people laugh, that inspire others, and that help others, that people flock to. They flock to those people when they're practicing satya, growth, and truthfulness, because they're trying to grow out from being in those subgroups, like the people I mentioned earlier in yoga, that were just not so nice. So if you're in a growth mode and you really want to grow and change the way you look at social media, these are some real world practical things you can do based in yoga philosophy that will help you to become a happier person. If you decide you do not want to do this stuff, then you're just going to stay in the social media world that you're in now, and you'll have anxiety and you'll have depression. Those are the things that if you can control that, great, stay in that. But if not, and you really want to level up, this is the way to do it. And on the next episode, we're going to actually talk about some even deeper ways that you can control your social media feed. Some of it is not easy, some of it is not fun, and some of it, though, is actually very creative in nature. And I will share those with you on our next episode. So I will see you there. Okay, one last thing. The content in the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast is not intended as a replacement or a substitution for the advice of any medical professional, like a physician, a psychologist, or a qualified therapist or any other medical professional. It is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only.